Cool. So my name is Patrick Colincherry. I'm a product marketing manager here at Twilio. I've been the person who's emceeing these sessions, and I'm also going to go do part of the session with my friends from Presidio, Mladen Milanovic, and Court Swenson. And we're going to be speaking about how to migrate your contact center to Twilio Flex and provide you with a quick overview of a couple of things there. As a quick note, from a high-level standpoint, we're going to be following these three things. First, we're going to start with this notion of incremental migrations, then move into discussing moving over voice flows, and then finally, we're going to go show what a migration in action looks like, specifically in terms of moving away from Cisco UCCE. So let's go ahead and kind of start things. How many of y'all have seen this video before? Raise your hands if anyone has seen this. 1, 2, 3 people? Awesome. So what's happening in this video is basically, this is Shibuya Station in Tokyo. And they're converting an above-ground line into a subway line. This station handles 740,000 passengers per day. And they had to finish this migration in 4 hours. It took 1,200 people and months of planning to do so. Migrating over a production contact center is just as complicated as this. On the bright side, though, you don't have to worry about doing this in 4 hours, or you should not be doing this in 4 hours in most cases. In fact, many of our customers on Twilio Flex do not do this all at once. The folks that you heard speak today, Shopify and Lyft, they've all, along with some of our previous customers, have all taken this approach of moving over small groups onto their contact center and then more and more increasingly complex groups over, just so that they can go manage the complexity of the solution. So if you're a developer in this audience, you're probably wondering, why does this matter to me? Like, what's the point of talking about incremental migrations? Well, at a really high level, though, as a developer, your role in a migration is to build bridges between systems. Now, where you choose to build that bridge has a huge impact on how difficult it is to build. So if you build it, for instance, if you build a bridge in some place that doesn't have great soil, you have to spend a lot of time engineering for that and building around this. It's the same thing with if you have to build a really long span that has to go across two very disparate systems that are tightly integrated in their own places. So that kind of brings up the question of where should you build that bridge? So let's talk about 3 great spots to build your bridge. The first one is a specific channel. Many of our customers get started with a channel like chat, or a channel like SMS, or a channel augmentation like video, where they have all their agents segmented on that channel out, and then they start clean with Twilio Flex. Another place is for specific call types. You might have heard this when Jamie was mentioning this in terms of cutting over some of their agents, how they were starting with an individual type of call type over there. I think Chris had also mentioned this in the keynote talk too, of where they started. Pretty common for voice use cases. The third, and my favorite one of these, is for new business units or new use cases. And the reason why I like this is because you're not really building a bridge here. You're more building a hovercraft, in the sense that you don't have to worry about where you start and where you end. Just because you start just kind of like that. So TLDR on this, pick a starting point without a ton of dependencies. Now, I think that the whole civil engineering metaphor is getting a bit too played out, so we're going to switch to something completely different, and we're going to talk about Mordor. Walking into Mordor. So for those of you who are Lord of the Rings fans, one does not simply walk into Mordor. Just like that, one does not simply move over voice workloads. There's some couple of tricky steps that you have to face if you're going to walk into Mordor or move over voice workloads. Otherwise, Boromir is going to go yell at you. So let's talk a bit about the first one. And this is a bit of a Lord of the Rings deep cut as a side note. You're learning a lot about me in this session. So choosing between the Black Gate and Shelob's Lair. So do you go through a gate that is guarded by a bunch of orcs, or a lair of a spider? And hopefully you have someone else other than Gollum who's walking you through this. That's basically, how do you take calls from a shared number and send it to the right platform? With this challenge, there's really 2 decisions that you need to go make. The first decision is, how do you get that call from that first platform to the second platform? And then the second decision is, who holds the number? What we mean by that is, who is the one who actually owns that number itself? Is it the previous carrier that you're working with, or is it Twilio that you work with on there? So let's talk about that first decision. Trick question. It's not actually a huge decision. You have really 2 options in order to go get calls between Twilio and your legacy provider. The first one is sending those calls over DID, and the second is sending those calls over SIP. In almost every single case, it makes more sense to send those calls over to SIP. It's cheaper, it's more reliable, and it's all in all, there's a cool couple of tricks that you can do from a SIP perspective. However, there are some platforms where you can't send them SIP directly. Certain cloud contact center platforms are like this, where they will only accept input from a DID. So that would be a place where you'd use a DID. Or another place would be if, for instance, you have a lot of legacy hardware that's built around this. Let's say you have a huge TDM infrastructure. I can't believe I'm talking about TDM. This is like predating me, but if you have like a huge amount of TDM infrastructure, for instance, and needed to move that over without having a cut over to SIP, it might make sense to go pass it over a DID. So the next one on this is who's on first. So you have two options of who's on first over here. You can have Twilio being the person who holds the number, or you can have your legacy person being the person who holds this number. There's advantages and disadvantages to each of these, but in general, I'll sum it up to this. If you have a large amount of complexity, or if you have like a very small group that you're migrating away from your existing platform, leave it on your legacy provider. Just because it's simpler that way, you have to go deal with less headaches. Be pragmatic about this. If you're in a place though where you're moving a larger use case or a larger call volume, then do it onto Twilio, port the number over to Twilio, and then move that from a SIP perspective. Now, one thing I do want to note though is that many of our customers actually start their migrations to Twilio before even moving a single agent over by moving their IVR. If you go down the path of leaving your number with your legacy provider, you will end up tromboning that call. For those of you who are not used to telco, this is a technical term. It blew my mind when I first entered into the telco world that tromboning is a term. So it tends to be a bit more efficient from a call flow perspective to go hold that number on Twilio because you don't have the back and forth and back and forth. So what does that actual ideal way look like? It's actually really simple. If you port that number to Twilio, when you receive an incoming call, you just return a piece of TWIML that says, dial this SIP address, and then you receive that call in your contact center platform. This is deceptively simple because it is really that simple. I mean, that's literally it in terms of what you return back. This uses a product called Twilio SIP domains, which Court and the folks at Presidio will be walking you through how that configuration looks like in order to actually send that call over. Side note, if any of you remember early 90s Zombocom, that won't actually receive SIP addresses, so please don't try and send them SIP traffic. They won't be very happy with me. So the next sort of challenge, entering the mines of Moria. What's the sort of the riddle that you need to go bypass in order to get past this big door over here? This one is really tied to transferring voice calls between Twilio Flex and another platform. So kind of diving into this, what's so tricky about transfers? Really, there's kind of two things. The first one is doing the actual transfer. And then the second item on this is maintaining the context from one contact center system to the other. Because you don't want to end up in a situation where you have your existing agents on your legacy provider asking the customer for information that you've already collected ahead of time. So let's talk about each of these issues and how to go solve this. Number one, transferring calls externally. And as a quick note, I will have these slides available after this talk, so don't worry too much about the way this is. From a Flex perspective, the way you do this is by making a request to an external function and including the tasted as a post parameter. And then from there, we have a programmable voice API called the Agent Conference API. You can use that to go make an outbound call and set early media to false so that your agent can go hear the actual ringing itself and then drop off if it's a cold transfer or actually stay on if it's a warm transfer. And if you remember the previous TWIML that we showed, you'd use that in order to actually send that SIP call over to that external contact center. All this returns a 200 OK. You'll hear the actual early media, and then you eventually hang up the call. What does this look like from a code perspective? Yeah, this is terrifying. I am a marketer who's writing code. But this is a Twilio function that does this. This is like 6 lines of code, if I can actually count. But again, super simple there. You've got the tasted as the event information along with who you're actually calling. We're adding the events, basically the caller's information to the SIP URI as part of their username, just so that we can go preserve that caller ID over there, since you don't want to end up, you want to go keep their caller ID in one place, and the caller ID is going to look like a verified Twilio number by default. So pretty simple, but let's build on this. Let's talk about keeping context using the REST API. If you're using a modern contact center platform, many of them have visual flow builders that'll let you go make a REST API request to a endpoint when you actually accept that call. Great thing about TaskRouter is that all of the information and attributes on that task are available on this, and you can filter it by the actual phone number that's incoming onto this. So it's a single REST API call. You can get back those task attributes and map it into this. However, if you're in a position where you're not so lucky, where you don't have that capability, or it's a bit difficult because you have a lot of infrastructure that's built around the existing attributes or the existing SIP that you've built, you can actually use the X headers on that. So if you remember back to that previous diagram that we showed over there from a sequence diagram perspective, all we're doing is we're adding a JSON stringified variant of the attributes in the post parameter. And then what you do is you add query string parameters to the SIP URI. And what that basically does is it sets the headers, it sets X headers from that query string parameter itself. I'll pause here if folks are taking photos of the slide real quick. Good, good, sweet. All right. What does this actually look like from a code standpoint? This is definitely marketer-written code because that's like 3 lines of code to go take a flat JSON map and turn it into what those URI components look like. All we did was we tacked this onto the end of that actual URI itself. And here's what something would look like if I made a call. In here, I've included 2 parameters into this, the requested queue and the user ID as part of this. And if you actually looked at this in Wireshark, which I did, this is what the actual SIP invite's going to look like. Those same headers that you saw previous to this get added on as a set of X headers there with that information. And in a few minutes, Court's going to go show how to map that and what this looks like from a UCCE perspective in terms of using those exact same headers to provide the agent and the legacy system with the same context that you gathered over here. So let's talk about takeaways. A couple takeaways over here. Number 1, independent groups means less migration work. Number 2, when a call comes along, you must SIP it. That's a very Devo reference over there. And number 3, if you need headers, X headers are going to give it to you. It's a DMX right there from the 90s. So that's about it. So thanks for listening to my portion of the talk, and I'd like to invite Mladen Milanovic and Court Swenson to the stage to put this into practice. So.
You guys can hear me? All good. OK, guys, my name is Mladen Milanovic. I'm Senior Director of Professional Services for Presidio. How many of you guys run on-prem contact center today? How many of you guys are planning to migrate to cloud, to Twilio Flex in next 3 to 6 months? OK, so it's a good audience. So what do we do? Usually when we walk and talk to our clients, we are faced with a architecture like this. It's a typical on-prem architecture. It can be Cisco, it can be Avaya, it can be Skype for Business, it can be Genesys. So what we usually have, there is a PBX that runs enterprise telephony. There is some contact center agents. There's some IVR. There's integration with ACD, integration with the CTI. And there's some sort of integration with PSTN. It can be a TDM, but in most cases it's SIP, and we have some SBC going on. So if we look into the overall architecture, the on-prem solutions are very complex. They're very expensive. They're non-flexible if we need to add additional features. But the problem is that they are not fully depreciated. You just bought a good big PBX. You bought a new ACD, and you invested $1 million. And you now need to migrate to a cloud because there's just some digital feature that your business wants to consume. It's very difficult to sell cloud migration if your PBX and your ACD is not fully depreciated. However, we all work closely with businesses. And today, in a digital transformation era, everybody wants to consume new technologies and new features. They want to compete in a digital world. So we need to provide them tools how to integrate and how to build and bring those features into the contact center. So at the same time, we need to be kind of business savvy and maintain that system and maintain the system until the system is not fully depreciated. Additionally, we need to worry about minimization of the risk. We don't want to go into the contact center and impact the day-to-day business operation. So we need to make a plan, create a plan, and show the way that our solution is reliable, scalable, and it can bring a value to our businesses. So the first step that we usually recommend to our clients, let's talk about IVR. So we are going to identify one department, and we're going to take that IVR and put it in the cloud in Twilio. Why? Because initially, when we build that IVR, we can start consuming digital features. We can bring in Lex. We can bring in Google Cloud. We can bring Dialogflow. Today, we know that we can be PCI compliant, and we can start taking payments. So there is an immediate benefit, immediate impact on your enterprise. What we also need to do, as Patrick mentioned, we need to maintain, we need to integrate that IVR into the enterprise telephony system. So we have a programmable SIP going to that SBC. So in essence, the call is coming in as it was coming before. We are routing call over to Twilio. We are processing. We have additional features. We are maintaining the context of everything. And then we are returning call back, and we are receiving that call on legacy PBX. But at the same time, we are maintaining the context and sending the context to the agent, and agent can receive a screen pop. So in order to demonstrate how this works, this is a basic call flow that we built. So we built a sales and support. We did the directed dialogue. We have a voice menu. So we're going to use that throughout the entire demonstration to demonstrate how this migration can work. This is the example call flow. So we didn't use Studio here, but everything can be done in Studio today. So this is the high level how we're going to be running this demonstration. Court is going to show us the configuration steps.
OK, guys, can everybody hear me? OK, great. So basically, here are the high-level steps for what we have to go through to get through this integration. Obviously, first thing, this is Twilio. We have to have a number. As Patrick said, and as Vlad said, we have chosen to ingress all of our numbers in from the carrier into Twilio for this example, which makes the most sense. We have the most control, and we're migrating in IVR. So obviously, get your phone number in, and you're going to point it to your IVR. As we said, we're using a Twiml-based IVR in here instead of Studio. We can absolutely do this in Studio, but for the demonstration purposes, we're just going to use a simple Twiml app. So next case, you are going to configure your trunk origination. So again, you're building a SIP trunk between Twilio using the SIP domain and into your SBC and your PBX environment. And you have both origination and termination. And obviously, you have to have that pathway going through. And then additionally, termination, we're showing here's what our SIP endpoint is for delivering calls to it. These calls will get passed right into your PBX or your SBC if you have it configured and ready to accept these calls. So these are the high-level steps from the side of Twilio. On the reverse side, you have your SBC or whatever is in your on-prem environment. At this place, you have to be able to ensure that you can accept those calls from IP addresses associated with Twilio, provide any necessary authentication that you might need or any TLS that might need to be in there. But then additionally, as you can see on the bottom there, we are expecting to bring those SIP headers in that Patrick talked about and Milan talked about to enable that integration and pass that context. In this case, we're passing 3. We're going to pass an account number that the caller is going to enter. And we're going to pass the account SID and the call SID to link back these records from the IVR into the on-prem system and the legacy system. So,
thank you for calling Presidio. How can I help you? Please say sales or support.
Support.
Please enter your employee ID via the keypad. You entered 98765. If that is correct, press 1. If not, thank you. Please wait while we connect you to a support representative.
So you see we set the cookie for that, and then we're going to pass it across. Here it comes across on the SIP call, and you can see that it's in there, and it's coming in on our variables. It's moving a little fast, but basically what's happening is on your invite, you're going to have, there they are on the bottom. There's your headers. That's it. You're passing context. You're passing whatever you need from your Twilio system and your IVR over to the other side. And then ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to send that to the legacy system, and your agent answers it, gets delivered, and there you have that information right on their screen. So right away, you moved that IVR right off of your legacy system, brought it into Twilio in no time, and you've integrated the systems very easily and very simply. So I'm going to pass back to Mladen, and he's going to go through some headers for a second.
So we moved the IVR over to Twilio. The next step is let's just move some agents. Again, we are trying to maintain and leverage the legacy and existing technology until it depreciates. So what we are going to do in this step, we're going to move the agents over to Twilio. We're going to be queuing that department in a Twilio Flex. The contact center agents are going to be using the fancy and new the Twilio Flex desktop, but they are going to use existing enterprise phones to receive the calls and handle the customer interaction. Now, what we need to be very careful with is we still need to maintain the enterprise dial plan. So when we are configuring all those things, we need to ensure that we don't create a contact center as a separate island. So we still need to ensure that contact center agents can transfer the calls or call the people or the employees that are on the rest of the enterprise telephony system. So in this specific case, we're going to receive the call for the department. At this point, in order to kind of optimize the traffic, we can migrate the number over to the Twilio cloud. We are going to have an initial interaction with the Twilio IVR. We're going to queue the call in Flex, and then we're going to deliver a call to the agent that is registered on Flex, but use the Cisco phone.
Okay. And in this case, we already have built out our integration. We have our SIP trunking, and we have our integration at the piping level. So we have the plumbing down. The next thing we have to do is we have to configure Task Router or Flex as we normally would. You're going to obviously set up your Flex instance, your demo. Then you're going to configure your workspace as you might need to in any Task Router implementation and customize it as you need. This is no different than what you would do day to day as you're building out a Task Router or a Flex environment. You're also going to build out your workflows, same as you normally would. You're already used to this process. There's not a whole difference here. Where the magic really happens is where you configure your worker. At this point, what we're showing is we're configuring this worker to pass that call to a SIP domain, a SIP URI, rather than to the Flex client. And what you can do here is you can either put a phone number in here, you can put a SIP URI, or whatever you need. In this case, we're telling it that it's passing to that same SIP domain that we configured previously, that we're going to push it across that pipe to our other system. So. And we're going to show that right here. We're going to show next is two different ways that you do that. You can either pass it over as a number within that SIP domain, or you can pass a SIP URI if your SBC and your on-prem system does support that. Some do and some do not. So, but we're going to use SIP here. So, in this case, again, here are our invites coming across, and you can see this one we're passing in numbers. They're going a little fast again. But right there on the top, we're passing it into 1,000. It gets sent in, translated, and sent into the SBC and the PBX. And here's a legacy phone for us to look at. It's going to ring, and it actually just comes right across, and the agents will get it. But it will show up in Flex, is where they're going to see that call, and their phone on their desk will ring, or their soft phone, or whatever they choose to use. So, okay, pass back to one.
So we successfully maintained the department on the existing legacy phones, and it's good. We have new features. The customer, the end user, and customer is happy. So what we are doing next, we're going to leverage the Twilio desktop, and we're going to leverage the soft phone that we already have enabled. So pretty much entire, in our case, support department is going to live in Flex. A very important takeaway, we need to maintain dial plan, because at the end of the day, we need to enable enterprise telephony users to call our department as well as other agents. And at this point, for sure, we need to migrate our DIDs off of our enterprise trunk, just to ensure that we have a most optimal call flow from a telephony traffic perspective.
And in this case, you at this point, you've already accomplished all of the really hard things. I mean, you've laid the groundwork for delivering calls between systems. The interoperability is already there. You've built out your task router and your Flex workflows. Everything is built. At this point, all you need to do is you need to bring those calls into Flex completely for the WebRTC rather than sending them across SIP. So the hard work is done. So everything that Patrick talked about and led up to that, hey, you need to take this at little small steps and move and build upon what you've done. This is where it pays off, because this is the easiest migration of all of them. Basically, you're doing your last queuing, and basically you're confirming that instead of sending it across the pipe, we're going to send it in and send it to Flex. So on your IVR, instead of sending it across, you're going to enqueue it in your call flow there, and then you're going to modify your worker configuration. You can see it's just sending it to the client, which is the Flex client right there. So and here's our call coming back in. Again, it's the same call, same workflow. We're just sending it to a different spot.
How can I help you? Please say sales or support.
Sales.
Please enter your employee ID via the keypad.
And we're going to do the same thing. She's going to enter all the digits and all the information. At this point, we're going to pass
You
the
entered
Flex.
98765. If that is correct, press 1. If not, please press 2. Thank you. Please wait while we connect you to a support representative.
And Flex is going to receive this call. It's going to pass in that data. And then at this point, you're wide open to take advantage of all the things that we talked about within Flex. I mean, you can, at this point, you can integrate with your CRM. You can build out the React environment as you need. You can bring in anything you want here. And this is the easiest step of the migration because you're really just changing that one piece for each worker, and you brought them in. So at this point, you have this whole plumbing into your enterprise telephony environment, and you have the new environment where you can take advantage of these things. Your agents can be wherever they need to be, and you really can now leverage the whole power of Flex as it exists today. So, back to you.
So lastly, here's the final look and feel on the enterprise. So we migrated both departments, sales and support. Everything is migrated. We can time that migration based on your depreciation schedule. The only thing that is staying on-prem is your enterprise telephony. There are some customers that are moving the telephony in a cloud as well. But what we are seeing is that PBX usually stays there until it's definitely depreciated. And all numbers for, in our case, sales and support department are completely migrated over to Twilio. So the summary. You guys saw it looks very easy on paper. There's a lot of work to be done, lots of planning. But there is a couple of really important things that I want to point out and kind of I want you to guys leave with that. Number one is the SBC configuration. It's a very critical point. We need to ensure that we are capturing those SIP headers and that we are passing data. You cannot have IVR and you have all interaction and you just transfer the call over to the agent without really passing the information what customer did over in IVR. That's the first thing. The second thing, in order to configure that successfully, you need to be careful around your SIP URI format. The second thing, another thing is dial plan consistency, because we need to ensure that everybody in the enterprise can call everybody. Otherwise, you're going to have some angry agents and angry supervisors. And the most important thing at the end is reporting. You need to think about reporting. The first thing that you are going to do before you start planning the migration is walk into your supervisor or the managers that are managing contact center and talk to them how they report the interaction, how they report in IVR, how they report in a current system. Because if we messed up the reporting, there is a big chance that someone is not going to get paid. There's a lots of incentives that supervisors and managers in the contact center are getting off of the reports. So ensuring that we are creating the reports and that we can report during the migration is the important one. So start your migration with the reporting in mind and continue migration, keeping in mind all those steps. And we feel that if you guys start with a low-risk department and moving from one to another, you guys would have a successful migration. So thank you very much for everything.
Thanks.
It's great.
Thanks, Patrick.
Sweet.